Good evening and welcome to another meeting of the Governance and Ethics Committee, particularly on this occasion to address the latest version of potential alterations to the Constitution. I'm Councillor Jeff Camp, the Chairman of the committee, and for the benefit of those of the public who are looking in, we are partly on Zoom and largely present in the chamber. In addition to myself, the other members of the committee in attendance are Councillor Jeff Beck, who won't be visible on Zoom as he doesn't have a laptop, but is actually physically present. Jeremy Cottam, Rick Jones, Tony Linden, David Marsh, Jeff Mays and Andy Moore. And we've had apologies from B. Aloco just recently, which we'll come to. We have a parish council representative, Councillor Bill Graham, welcome Bill, from Shawcombe-Donington, and an recently appointed independent audit member, Simon Carey. Parish councillors and independent members are permitted to speak, but cannot vote with us on the items on the agenda. Sarah Clark is the officer advising the meeting and the person who's put most work into this report. And Stephen Chard is keeping us in order as clerk to the meeting, with Lizzie Rees as the Zoom host. Standard warning, with the evacuation alarm this evening, leave the building immediately, proceed but via the emergency exit route shown to us by the trained officers present, and assemble at the car park of the Dolphin Public House. Right, I should just at the outset of this, before we go to apologies one, just be absolutely clear. This is a complicated subject, and I'm sure Sarah will return to this, but it has been extensively worked over by both officers and a special group of cross-party group of members. So we aren't here tonight to go through line by line and try and analyse the context and the content. What will be explained to us is the principal changes broadly. And we are here just to say either we're happy and comfortable with those or to question them if we feel we need to know more about it. So we're not here to go into any detail on this at all, really. We're just here to go through it, convince ourselves that our colleagues, who of course we trust, have done a job in sorting this out and that we can pass it through. Okay, Stephen, any apologies? We said Councillor Aloco initially.
Yes, so in addition to Councillor Aloco, we have an apology from Parish Councillor David Southgate.
Any declarations of interest? Not likely, I wouldn't think much on this, but no, thank you. Okay, well, I may have stolen a little bit of Sarah's thunder here, but I'll ask her to introduce the report, and then Councillor Graham Bridgman, who's been the chair of the group who've done a lot of the heavy work from the member side on this, to give us a run through the report in broad terms as he sees it. Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. As members have heard, this is the papers before members tonight are in effect the conclusion of what has become known as phase 2 of the Constitution review work, which was commenced in 2019 and as members of G&E are aware, was kind of largely postponed during the pandemic. The parts that are before members tonight relate to a review of the budget and policy framework of the authority, the financial rules of procedure and the contract rules of procedure. And there is also a glossary which will kind of touch upon all areas of the Constitution. And importantly, once these parts are approved, we will be able to start to operate using the new rules, which will hopefully be approved by Council on the 16th of March, in addition to those which were previously considered by Council last October. So as the Chairman has alluded, there has been a lot of work that's gone into this. So since Council considered the last or phase 1 in October 2022, there have been 6 meetings of the task group, and I've calculated 15 hours of diary time for the task group. And then in addition to that, there's been an awful lot of officer work and obviously preparation by members in advance of all of those meetings. So there has been a lot of consideration given to these rules and procedures and to ensuring that we get these correct. The reason that the papers were circulated late for this meeting was that the last meeting of the task group actually took place last Tuesday, and further changes were requested as part of that. Some of those changes that we had discussed in the last Constitution Review Task Group were not updated because, as members will be aware, we had a rather busy week last week with the budget meeting, etc. as well. So there is some text in red. Councillor Bridgman, Joseph Holmes and myself met this afternoon, and we now largely have what we believe is a final set of rules which we will be circulating to members of the task group. What I really must emphasise is that in keeping with phase one, what we haven't sought to do as part of this review is in effect to tear up the existing rule book and to rewrite the rules and to change significantly any of the thresholds that exist within there or the limitations. So we're not seeking to extend or curtail powers by these proposed changes. I think it is of note, or some of the changes of note, I think I'd referred to the fact that the capital rules were for violence, and actually apologies to Councillor Cottam, who I spoke to just before the meeting, and I said that there were no changes. We had actually proposed some changes to the capital violent thresholds to bring them in line with the revenue violent threshold, so that in effect it's easier for officers to operate to in effect a single set of rules, and the table that they are in is going to be subject to some further refinements that will go to the task group following that meeting last week, ahead of it going to council for approval. One of the other changes that these rules have introduced is the fact that at the moment all contracts requiring executive approval will go by way of individual reports to the executive. This can be administratively quite burdensome. So what it is proposed is that executive will be able to give authority in advance where there are proposals to award contracts with a value over £2.5 million. What will still need to happen prior to those contracts being completed and entered into is that there will still be a publication on the forward plan of our intention to enter into that contract, because the officers, although operating under a delegated authority, will still be subject to the requirements around the need to publish key decisions. So that shouldn't reduce the transparency and the public accessibility to that important information. Members will note that also we had, the task group had considered changing some of the thresholds in the contract rules of procedure. Certainly colleagues in our commissioning team feel that our rules are more restrictive than some of our counterparts. And we were going to propose some amendments on that basis, but internal audit are about to undertake a review of the commissioning processes, and so they are going to look at the various thresholds and do some of that comparative work. And actually, if we are out of kilter, we will bring back proposals to G&E and council in due course to amend those. So I think finally, members will note that it's proposed that the provisions be implemented with effect from April 2023. I've also been asked about whether there should be a date. There probably should, and I would probably be asking members to agree the end of the month or no later than the end of the month, so we can go live earlier if possible. And colleagues from digital services have been meeting with Stephen and his team, and it is expected that we will be able to go live with those early in April once approved by council. So I think unless there are any specific questions, that is probably all I intend to say at this point. Oh, apologies. There was one final change that I had agreed to refer to, and it's not actually in the meeting and council bodies rules. Members of council will be aware that last week we also had an extraordinary meeting of council after the budget meeting, and in the process of arranging for that meeting, what became apparent is a potential lacuna in the rules whereby 5 members of a local authority can requisition the chairman to call an extraordinary meeting of council. Once the chairman receives such a requisition signed by 5 members of council, the chairman is required to call the meeting within a week, basically. What the rules do not prescribe, however, is that the chairman or when that meeting must take place. So in theory, the chairman could call a meeting for 12 months' time. Now, I think such a decision might be subject to judicial review because on the basis of unreasonableness. But I think members from across the groups, and I think the conversations have been between Councillor Bridgman and Councillor Brooks, and what has been agreed between the groups that we should work towards 30 working days. And I think I have suggested that we do have a caveat in there around usually or only in exceptional circumstances that it would go beyond that. But I think to try and put some parameters around that the need to actually hold the meeting once that's been called by 5 members of the authority. So that isn't in these rules, but that will be presented in an updated report to council following this meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. And I perhaps should have mentioned in the introduction that it's very reassuring to have numerous references to the Section 151 officer in this report. And nice to have Joseph Holmes, the Executive Director and 151 officer with us. Graham, would you like to make any comment or your summary of where you feel the report is?
Chairman, thank you. Yes, members will know that we put the phase 1 on hold in order to ensure that phase 2 came forward, because there is an amount of linkage between what's in certain bits of phase 2 and this committee in particular. And therefore we wanted to make sure that the two married up before the entire package was agreed by council. Now, phase 1 has been agreed by council, subject to what Sarah's just been speaking about the extraordinary meeting piece. So that would be an amendment to what council's already agreed. But so far as this piece of work is concerned, let me start by thanking officers, and in particular Sarah. Sarah has put an extraordinary amount of effort in to get us to where we are. She and I have had conversations on Sundays about what she's been doing on that Sunday and what I've been doing on that Sunday in relation to some of the documents that you've ended up looking at tonight. So a serious amount of work has been put in, not least by Sarah herself. What you're looking at here is and to some extent unlike phase 1. Phase 1, there was a whole load of consolidation in phase 1. We brought all sorts of different bits of the Constitution together because there was overlap and duplication. There isn't, to that extent, overlap and duplication here. But if I can put the project into context, flowing out of this, I think we will need to do some work in the fairly near future on what are currently parts 1 and parts 2 of the Constitution. That's the sort of introduction to the nature of a Constitution and the articles of the Constitution. And the reason we'll need to do some work in relation to those is because there are some changes particularly in phase 1, which flow through to the articles. So, for example, this will no longer, and I'm sure officers will find it very difficult to get away from, G and E. It will become G. It will become the Governance Committee, as the Overview and Scrutiny Management Commission will become the Scrutiny Commission, to try to make things a little more straightforward. If I speak to the papers you've got in front of you, you have papers with some red text in them. That red text is a combination of things that I spotted as I went through and wanted some clarification on, things that Sarah spotted and as she went through and wanted a discussion around. So that text in red is now all but one item now in black. It's all been dealt with this afternoon in a conversation that Sarah, Joseph and I have had. So it does indicate that actually they weren't very difficult questions. There was nothing particularly controversial there. And the fact that we got through that in an hour and a half shows that in fact it was relatively straightforward questions. They just needed ironing out. So I do commend what you've got in front of you. I will say that, for example, just to give you a flavour of what's been changed, we had references to postal orders and cross checks and all sorts of fairly archaic terms in the money business in the financial rules. We have very much tidied things up, and I do think that we now have, firstly, a format that is easier to read and assimilate, I hope, and a set of documents that sits together more easily. We're using the bit of work that we haven't yet really got to. It is a movable feast, is the glossary, because the glossary, the whole idea behind the glossary is to use the same phrase throughout the document. So, for example, if you define something as the budget and policy framework and you call it the framework, you now know what the framework is. We can refer to the framework wherever we need to, and it does get referred to in other places, so that we all know what the framework is. It just tidies things up a lot. And just, if I may, Chairman, just to finish, in addition to the work you've got here, there is ongoing work, as it were, sort of a little bit under the waterline in relation to the various bodies. So we've effectively agreed the terms of reference for the various committees of council. And in turn, they are now agreeing, in particular in my case, the Health and Wellbeing Board is agreeing the terms of reference of a host of bodies that sit underneath the Health and Wellbeing Board, and then there are actually bodies that sit underneath that and bodies that sit underneath that. So those terms of reference will be agreed by the bodies. They don't need to come through governance. They don't necessarily need to go through the council, although at the end of the day, the council will be effectively adopting them. But these terms of reference, which are very much procedural, you know, who are the members? What does this body do? What is its, what are its statutory responsibilities? Those will come through as we get, as we're drafting them. I was looking at one today. So that sort of work is ongoing and flowing. But I think we have done an awful lot of work to get to where we are. And I certainly say, and thank to all the members of the task group, because we've met on the last 3 Tuesdays. So we met last week, the week before, and the week before that, in order to get these documents before you. And I do say thank you to all the members of the task group for the effort they've put in. And I, in the honour of words, I commend these papers to you, Chairman.
Well, thank you, Graham, and thank you as well for your commitment on behalf of the membership and the Sundays you've given up and the Sundays Sarah's given up with you to get this on its feet. Okay, well, we'll invite questions. Maybe I could start with Councillor Jeff Beck, who I think had a query on page 2 that you wanted to raise about dates. Yeah. Councillor Beck.
It says in the papers that this should come into effect in April 2023. I'm just querying as to whether we should actually have a day stated as well. Sarah Clark, before the meeting, suggested it would be probably most suitable to have this at the end of the month rather than the first of the month, and that is something which certainly gains my support. It seems a very logical time to do it, if we need to do it.
Sarah, would you like to pick that up?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to insert a date in there. And actually, although I'd said we can have that as a long stop, I think actually because this will become in effect the operating rules, I think we should give a definitive date. And I would therefore ask for the 30th of April to be the agreed date if members wish to propose that change.
Thank you for that. Okay, anyone else got any issues about principle? Tony.
Yeah, just to let you know, I'll be presenting my fees and charges task group report tomorrow evening. So I know it's been referenced in the Constitution and I'm quite happy with it. So yes, Chairman, I would like to propose the officer's recommendations.
Okay, Councillor Bank.
Chairman, I'm very happy to actually second that proposal, with one condition, if I may. May I propose to members that if they agree with that this committee should accept these papers, may I propose that it be recorded in the minutes of this meeting our particular appreciation to Councillor Graham Bridgman, who has so admirably led the Constitutional Review Task Group, ably assisted by cross-party councillors to reach the position we're in today. This has been carried out with devil a lot of work from Sarah Clark, Joseph Holmes, Stephen Chard and other officers. Thank you very much, Chairman.
I'd include that in my proposal, Chairman.
Sure, thank you. Councillor Moore.
Just a small bit of detail, and I know because I've been on the task group and working through this. In the contract rules, I'm not quite sure that we've got the VAT situation right yet. I see 5.5 exclusive of VAT, and I think we decided that, and then when you go to the table it's referring to, it's inclusive of VAT. So there's a little bit of tidying to do there.
Yeah, and actually, apologies, we had a conversation at the last task group, which follows a rule change where all contract thresholds should now, and certainly the legal thresholds, should be inclusive of VAT. And there was a conversation about amending our thresholds accordingly or by raising them all by 20%. But following a conversation with internal audit today, so there was a meeting today of the finance and governance group, and our internal audit manager, Julie Gillespie, had raised some concerns because of potential confusion. So they are going to take that away and review that as part of their audit that they are undertaking at the moment, because I think it's the way our financial systems work. So I think she didn't want us to automatically make everything inclusive. So I need to do a second review through the rules, because we absolutely need to be consistent in there. But I think we're not going to propose to make any of those changes around thresholds at this point, pending the audit review. And they will now consider the issue of VAT on those thresholds.
Thank you, Sarah. Anyone else who has any? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Just one comment and one question, if I may. I think when we look at the recommendations, we've been asked to look at two things really. One is the updated rules of procedure for phase 2, and also then reaffirm the phase 1 recommendations as well. The phase 2, with an open declaration of limited expertise, I've been through as much as I can and cannot pick up anything that I can see that's wrong. So I'm very happy to support the recommendations that support that. In the meeting rules of procedure that we approved before, I may be looking in the wrong place, but referring to actually recent budget meetings, we'd agreed that there was I think a change of processing of potential amendments that allowed amendment proposers to ask for separated votes. And I don't see that anywhere in this script. So I might be looking in the wrong place. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what's been included that was agreed as part of the budget amendment rules. And so that will be in what members don't have. And actually, I would propose a slight amendment to the proposed recommendation at paragraph F. So I think what we would be asking council to do is to note that whole part 1 or phase 1 in effect again, and we will include all of that. I will ask council and obviously ask them to approve the change to the calling of extraordinary meetings and the ability for members to ask for separate votes on a proposed or parts of a proposed amendment are within the whether it's in the council rules or the meeting rules, but there are particular rules for the budget meeting of council, and that's where they appear. I can see Councillor Bridgman is eager to point out the relevant rule and paragraph to highlight his extreme knowledge.
Let me deal with 2 things that have come up, if I may, Chair. One is on the inclusivity of VAT. Yes, thank you, Councillor Moore. The table has been amended. 5.5 has been amended. The version you're looking at still says exclusive, but my 5.5 says inclusive. But as Sarah says, we need that internal audit discussion as to, because there was this idea that we would simply uplift everything by 20%, but that doesn't work. because there are a number of non-VAT contracts. So we're waiting for guidance as to what the table will say. But 5.5, I think, will say inclusive because that's what the statutory basis is. But then the table may change, so that the actual thresholds may change in order to make life that more straightforward for officers. But obviously, I certainly think rounded numbers are that much easier. You know, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 is a lot easier than 9,342 pound, whatever. So let's see where audit go to with that, and then we'll reflect. In answer to Councillor Jones's point, the whole point of the meeting rules is obviously to be a set of meeting rules which apply to any meeting of any body. So you look to the individual body rules for differences, and therefore, if you go to the council rules, the council body rules, you will find all of the rules relating to budget meetings in there.
Thank you. That answers it. I was looking in the wrong place.
It's been a substantial document and a heavy read, and you haven't had it that long, but any other matters of issues of substance?
Councillors Bridgman and Kerr, sorry. Yeah.
That was, okay.
And then so Simon and Kerry are independent.
Independent,
Audit member.
our independent audit member. Simon, go ahead.
Hello there. I just wanted to say, just listening to the conversation, having read through the document myself over the weekend, and I've had discussions over email with Sarah, again over the last couple of days. I'm quite happy with everything I've heard. I don't think I could add any further value to the process at this particular juncture.
That's very reassuring. Thank you, Simon. And it's good to hear that you feel that about it.
Thank you.
I've got a hand up would like to contribute, or should we take a vote?
Can I just say that I can't get on the screen because I can't find the invite. I am here, I am listening.
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Okay. Okay, should we move to a vote then? We've got a proposal that we accept the recommendations.
Chair, can I just check that the proposer and seconder are content with the changes that have been discussed? So the date that these will become live will be the end of April. The changes to the current proposed paragraph F, so that council will be asking council to note the final version of phase 1 in effect, and to approve that change to the sort of process around extraordinary meetings.
Chairman, the VAT, do we need to refer to that?
The latest version already has inclusive rather than exclusive, I think, but it's just we've got a slightly earlier version, I think, so as far as Graham's concerned. So.
Chairman, if I may, we also need to reflect that internal audit may come up with something that then needs another iteration, but
I consent to it all.
Well, thank you, Tony. It's very reassuring. Another piece of
I don't know
reassurance.
about Councillor Beck. Have you?
We have yeah, no, thank you, Councillor Beck. We have a proposal that we accept the recommendations in 2.1 A to I, and a seconder. Can we vote those in favour of accepting that recommendation? Unanimous. Excellent. Thank you very much. Great. And that was a single item. We have another meeting on the 20th of March. Far more meetings than I expected when I took this role last year, because we've had other things arrive, but I know we've got some substantial issues on that agenda that will come up. So hope to see you then, and good evening.